floor for if anybody is ready to make a first stab at a motion. Ms. Gibson.
I'll make a first stab at a motion. I'll make a motion that we approve the budget as changed by the staff with the following amendments. I would like to reduce the funding and appropriation in the fiscal year 2013 budget as follows. I want to reduce the fiscal year 2014 LP&L revenue bonds by $15 million, reduce the appropriation of the Lubbock Power and Light Capital Program by $15 million, and I want to increase expenditures in general fund by increasing the Building Inspection Cost Center budget by $119,000 and increasing non-departmental cost center budget by $100,000 for remediation on the fire training site for a total of increase of $219,000. Increase utilization of net assets in the general fund by $219,000. Increase the number of positions in building inspection by 1 plan checker and 1 inspector for a total of 24 positions, an increase of 2 positions.
I have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Motion dies due to lack of second.
Mr. Mayor, I'll do a second on it so we can discuss it.
All right, I now have a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Gibson?
Well, first of all, what I did was take out the $15 million for the smart meter appropriation, just because it's not necessarily that I'm against the smart meters. I just think that it is not the time yet. I think we need to do a little more research on them. I think we have some priorities that we need to look at, and I would like to see maybe looking at some smart meters that will be compatible possibly even later on with the other side, the water side. As far as the building inspector and the plan examiner, we have builders and developers that are paying for permits and they're not getting service that they deserve, and I just felt like that needed to be put into this budget.
Further discussion. Ms. Joy.
Yes, Cheryl, I have a question for you. We had talked in one of our sessions about this 3% increase for all employees.
Yes, ma'am.
And we've talked about it in I have 2 questions about it. One, does that include the city manager, the city secretary, and the city attorney? Because I thought we were pretty specific that would not include those 3 positions.
No, basically the council is the one who authorizes or doesn't authorize raises for those positions. Now when we calculate it on all the employees, but all that will be used is for those minus those 3.
We also, or I had also asked to look into doing a different type of allocation with some of the lower paid employees receiving a higher percentage or higher amount and less on the top. And I have seen some numbers on that, but as nearly as I can tell, this budget just says 3% across the board for everyone except city attorney, city secretary, and city manager.
Yes,
would that be accurate?
It's exactly what was proposed.
The other question I have is when you're talking about transfer of debt from stormwater, we haven't transferred all the debt for street maintenance from stormwater this year. All we've done is a portion of it. Would you speak to that, please, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. It's about 5 million, 5.4, somewhere around in there, million for street maintenance, James. I think it is.
That's what I thought.
Left though, in stormwater. Yeah, it's about 5 billion. It's a little over 5 million. That's about half of the debt service for next year for street maintenance. The street maintenance in this year and in next year, the issuing of debt for that is in general fund.
Is there old street maintenance debt still in the stormwater budget?
Yes, ma'am.
How much?
There's the debt itself. I'm sorry, I didn't bring the debt service schedule with me. The debt payment is is a little over 5 million, and we're transferring half of that payment to general fund this year. So there's about 2.6 million in debt payment left in stormwater.
Okay. It looks like we're pushing a lot of projects to next year, Are we going to next year be up a bit against some tough issues if we push all of these projects to next year?
Not all of them got pushed to next year. Some of them we spread out a little farther than that. We look at these every year. In fact, when we get ready to issue debt, we will sit down with the project managers at that time and say, do you really need this money? We look at the capital twice a year at least, and before we do budget, we will do project manager meetings with them on the capitals, and we will confirm whether or not they actually need the money at that time. And project needs change. If things slow down, they may not need it, but I don't feel that it'll be a problem, but we'll have to look at it next year and see where they are. But we didn't push all of them out till next year, and I do believe that we're going to look at them and see if we can space them maybe a little bit differently to try to ease into it.
And lastly, knowing that we have to have another place for the library in September 2014, public needs to know we do not have any monies allocated at this point in time for the library.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And would you kind of clarify that a little bit? We do have $25,000 a month lease budgeted. So
Yes,
we've
sir.
got that much. We don't have, and Ms. Joyce is absolutely correct.
Yes, sir.
But it's not like there isn't some money already there for that go-to-key branch. Is that correct?
Their lease payment is still included in their budget for next year. Yes, sir.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a fine point I was going to make, because I think you're right, Ms. Joy, in terms of public consumption. There is an O&M considerable enough to service a debt. The question is, and this will be a future decision for the council to look at, can we bridge gap something to reduce the offline period as we go from one to another, if that's the direction of the council. I would just say, Ms. Gibson, I appreciate you bringing forward stuff, but historically we've done it on the second reading, and as a courtesy we've provided it to the other members. Do you have a written copy so that we could look at what you've provided?
Yeah, I'll get you a copy.
If you could, it'd make it easier as I look at it. Beyond that, what is the corresponding tax rate for the cuts that you're making?
The tax rate is the 50 point.
Oh, so it would still flush out?
Yes.
Okay. All right, fair enough. If you could, just point of information, if I could get that. Thank you.
Further discussion. Ms. Grill.
Mayor, have we heard anything more from TxDOT about transferring the state highways to the city? Because we've not budgeted for that.
Yes, sir.
And there's some discussion that may occur within the next month to 13 months. Do we know anything more?
The commissioners met today. The story's changing a little. They're using the word voluntary now, which was never used before. When we met with TxDOT, we were told it could be implemented as early as September of this year or September of 2014. However, they did indicate that if the roads are handed off to us, they will be handed off in good condition, and in their opinion that will take a minimum of 1 year. So after the conversations I've had with them, I'm not anticipating any expense to the city in this fiscal year. I do have a further meeting scheduled for next week with both of our state representatives, our state senator, and a representative from TxDOT, and hope to get some more clarification at that point.
So if we have a wet winter and we have a lot of snow, even if they hand it off to us in pristine condition, that will still fall into us to maintain?
That is yet to be determined, and they are leaning, or they think like the commission is leaning towards probably a 2014 September start date. But here again, there's so much political pressure at this time that we're seeing a little backpedaling, maybe the best word of the commission. The words are softening. So I'm a little more hopeful today than I was 30 days ago. I do not think that we're going to have extra expenses in this year's budget necessary for the street maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hernandez.
Ms. Brock, just some questions to clarify your presentation for me. You said the base rate is actually going down on water
By $3.
by $3, and then there's no increase in stormwater, wastewater, and solid waste fees?
No, sir, there's none.
Also, I've got a little bit of a concern, as expressed by a couple of other council members, on the changes to the capital program.
Yes, sir.
we've been talking a lot about deferred maintenance and what we need to do in order to start addressing deferred maintenance that has been going on for many years. And so my concern is if we continue to make changes to our capital program and continue to push some of these projects out, are we making a bad situation worse?
Most of the projects that we made changes in or pushed them out either next year or other years, we did work really closely with the project managers. We did not ask them to move anything or change anything that they needed. We worked with them to see what things that they, well, for one example was the project of sewer line dredging. What we were told is we've tried to get to that, but they've done so much upgrades on the plants and they're so busy with some other things they just couldn't get to it. And they don't feel like they'll be able to get to it next year either. So essentially that was a good move. We're using money that's already there for projects that they do need in next year. So we didn't move all of them out. Some of them are changing funding sources where we're funding them with cash that we already have versus cash from next year. So we did work with them. Not any one of the project managers thought there were any problem in the changes that we made. So I don't feel that it'll be an issue.
So it almost begs the question, though, because they were originally included in the budget. And I suspect that the program managers were questioned and asked about including them in the preliminary budget, and they felt they were justified in doing so.
Yes, sir.
So to me, it begs the question, were we just being overly aggressive with our initial budget numbers, or being very, very conservative at this point?
Basically, they do these in March. That's one of the very first things we do when we start budget. They actually start putting them in February or March. And so what we found, because before we issue debt in January or whenever, we will sit down with them again and say, has anything changed? Do you really need this money this year? Because they don't have a crystal ball either. They're projecting the best they can when they're going to need the money to do those projects. So essentially we look at them twice a year anyway, and basically because they don't always, it may come to fruition that they didn't get something done in time to do this other project, and then we wouldn't issue the debt at that time for the other project. So it's something we look at all the time. I didn't get any impression from any of them that they felt that there were any issues with making the changes at this time. We are going to look at the projects next year. We're going to do a very good job of making sure that the order in which they're done or the timing on them is necessary so that we're not issuing debt we don't have to.
And I'm not necessarily questioning their judgment. I just want the public to understand that we're not pushing these things off simply for budget reasons or simply because of political pressure, but we're approaching this from a practical perspective.
Yes, sir. We just took another step this year that we hadn't taken in the past, where we sat down with them and said, are there any of these that you really don't have to have next year that could be done in other years, so that we could time them a little differently? One would be the 2 studies that we were going to do in wastewater. Though there was no reason that they had to be done in the same year, and they agreed with me that we could push those out and space them out a little better so that we're not hitting the budget and the model in the same year for 2 projects that are $250,000 apiece cash. So they just agreed that was they could do it. They didn't. What we find a lot is most of the project managers have their projects that they do are the most important thing. But when you work with them, you realize that they're more than willing to work with us on what we can do and when.
And I see the city manager out of the corner of my eye just.
The biggest project is the North Drainage Project. That's not being deferred. You just approved recently a $5 million change order to complete the Arnett-Benson Drainage Project. That's got to be completed before we can do the next, and it's going to take up next year anyway.
And that's
That is a good point. Yes, I'm sorry.
And I appreciate that, because that's on my list of things to ask. But we've discussed that before.
Yes, sir.
That even if we included that project in this upcoming year's budget, from a practical perspective, we would never be able to get to it by the end of this next fiscal year.
Yeah, they said probably. Yeah, we wouldn't. So it was good. It was a good move.
And along those same lines, the council was presented with 12 additional projects as far as facility renovations and upgrades February of this year,
Yes, sir.
and instead of doing 12, we're paring that down to 3.
Yes, sir.
And the same rationale, you can fund it, but if you can't, from a practical perspective, get it done, then why fund it this year?
Exactly, and that's the facilities has a limited amount of staff to manage projects, and so that's essentially, they can't do more than that.
Now, under your general fund revisions, the one thing that did catch my eye, and Ms. Brock, I really appreciate you putting that information together, but I'd appreciate it even more if we were provided a copy of it before the second vote on this.
All of this that's in here is in the ordinance in your book, in
Oh,
your
okay,
agenda
great.
book. This came directly out of the changes. Anytime, and I probably have never explained this before, none of us have ever explained this before. If we make changes between a proposed and final, we have to list every single change in the ordinance. And so in your ordinance, if you'll look, every single one of these is in there.
I appreciate that. And is those changes also published on our website for
They're in
for
the
everybody
agenda
to
that's
see?
published on the...
Great.
Yes, sir.
Under your general fund revisions, you had listed utilization of net assets and changes to that in at least 3 different categories. Could you just explain that?
Which
Generally
categories
speaking,
are we talking?
Well, if you could, I think it was slide 3 or 4.
Debt service fund, we did change utilization of net assets, and what that is we're using cash or money that we already have instead of a new revenue to do that. And you're going to find that all through the budget, and there is something I'd like to clarify since you've given me that opportunity. When you look at the budget and you're looking at the pages that say funding sources at the top, that is not all new revenue. Some of that is utilization of net assets of money that we already have. General fund is a perfect example. The increase in the budget was 14 million, but the actual increase in new revenues was more like 7. There's $7.7 million in next year's general fund budget that is utilization of net assets. So you're going to see it all through the budget, and basically it's money that the fund has that we're utilizing out of the fund versus new revenues.
Are there some, and I appreciate the explanation for the public, but I will tell you, I'm seeing there's been a lot of criticism of this council, especially of the new members of council, and not really directed toward me, but directed to some of the others who were running under different banners during their election, in terms of, the trying to reduce the fees and shift that burden from fees to the general fund.
Yes, sir.
In terms of cash funding capital projects as opposed to issuing new debt, in terms of just a variety of different things, and yet I would just make it a point and let the public know we didn't get to where we are today overnight.
No, sir.
So in order to start undoing some of these things that have been done for different reasons, and quite frankly, in my book, legitimate reasons in the past, and the legitimate reason is we needed to accomplish a lot of these tasks, and councils had to find a funding mechanism in order to accomplish these things, and a lot of times an increase in the property tax was not an option politically. So I call it creative financing, because that's what we were doing. But now it's trying to undo that creative financing that's been going on for many years and trying to align the expenditures with the proper sources of income. Now,
Yes, sir.
I'm seeing, first thing, street maintenance being funded out of the stormwater back to the general fund.
Yes, sir.
And one of the other things that this council has been criticized on is lack of tackling the issue of deferred maintenance. And in this budget, I see an attempt to at least address some of those things. Not the entire list and not everything that needs to be done, but at least a step in that direction. Reducing the fees. The stormwater fee is the classic example. You and your staff and senior management have gotten together and tried to figure out and have figured out a different way to go about funding those without a fee increase. cash funding of capital projects. One thing I'd like you to address is debt service. There's been a lot of talk about the amount of debt that the city of Lubbock has.
Yes, sir.
And what are your thoughts on that? And in context of this budget, have we been able to address that at all?
We have to some. It's minimal at this point. What we have to do, basically, it's going to take longer than the time that we've had to do this. I think we need to begin after the budget is approved and we start the new fiscal year. I think we need to start looking at that. I don't disagree that we need to stop issuing so much debt. I don't disagree that we need to get rid of some of the debt, pay off some of the debt that we have. But it is going to take time. And the reason being, we have limited funding sources. We have a limited amount of money to do it, and so we need to be smart about how we do it so that we don't impact the services to the citizens.
Mr. Hernandez, if you don't mind, I'd like to add just a little to her answer, because I requested this about a month ago. Last fiscal year, which is the first fiscal year that this city council sitting had control of the purse strings, is the first year in the last 9 years that the city's debt has not gone up. It was actually reduced for the first time over a 9-year period.
And you said we've addressed that issue a little bit, but I mean, as debt rolls off, you're addressing it by not incurring additional debt.
And the problem with that is in the enterprise funds, we still have projects that have to be done, and so we have to determine the best way to fund those and still reduce our debt at the same time.
One of the questions that I've got is, how much debt is too much debt for a city of our size with a budget of our size? Is there such a thing as...
I don't know that there is a magic number. I think the best thing to do is have as little debt as possible, so in bad times that we don't get caught like some cities have. I think there are going to be times we have to issue debt for large projects because there's just no way to fund them any other way. We've been extremely lucky in the last few years in having really low interest rates on our debt when we issued it, but that's not going to continue, and we are going to have to start looking at that. I think we just plug away at it a little at a time until we do that. That's about the best we can do at this point. I think it's just keep chipping away at it.
Well, and the question, I asked the question because debt does roll off.
Yes, it does.
And so you have less debt as a result of that. But your needs continue, and so you need to issue new debt to meet that need. I mean, whether we like it or not, all cities incur debt in order to finance major projects.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not... There's some major projects coming up this next year.
Yes, sir.
And a couple of them have been mentioned. A new Go-to-Key library, a new police station headquarters. And do you see us having in this budget the wherewithal to fund those with cash?
No, sir. The police station is a rather large project. Go-to-Key, it will depend on the price tag attached to it and what the council decides to do. And part of the problem with part of the reason there's no money for a new building or whatever is because council really hasn't made a decision yet as to where we're going with Go-to-Key. So once that's decided, then we will take a look at it and see where we can fund it from. I mean, that's about the best I can do without an amount to look at.
And I appreciate your answer, and it was more of a rhetorical question because, well, no, and I do appreciate your answer, but the public needs to understand the needs continue.
Yes, sir.
And the funding mechanism, aside from an increase in the property tax rate to cash fund some of these projects, and the property tax rate increase that you'd need for a new police headquarters is, it would create a greater outcry.
And one of the things that we need to point out is we've used utilization of net assets for a fairly large amount in general fund in this next year. That is not a normal thing. We usually do not have those kind of dollars to be able to utilize. We usually use them in our budget. Due to sales tax increases and some other things, that has been more. And so basically that gives us cash to be able to do some of those things that we need to do without debt financing them.
Well, and on that, in that area, where are we in terms of reserves?
As of 9/30/12, we're approximately 6.4 million above our policy level. That's part of the money that was used in this year. I have a projection for this year, but it is only a projection, and we will have to look at it again at year-end close. That was about 7.9.
Okay. So they're healthy.
Yes, sir.
I just have a couple of other questions in relation to Mayor Pro Tem Gibson's proposed amendments. One specifically concerning LP&L and smart meters. And I will tell you, I've been a proponent of televising the LP&L board meetings for quite a while, and the reason's real simple from my perspective. Sometimes presentations are made to the LP&L board that are just really good information. And yet, since they're not televised, unless you're there, you're going to miss it. And there was a good presentation by some experts called in, salespeople, concerning smart meters, and they made a very good presentation. Now, the proposal is to take out $15 million. And so the question becomes, first of all, for legal, does this council have the authority to do more than either approve or disapprove the LP&L budget?
The answer is, in my opinion, is yes, because you're looking at your overall budget, and you have a right to adopt your overall budget with everything that's in it or not with everything that's in it. So, in short answer, I think that Mayor Pro Tem's motion legally would be fine.
And I ask that in the context, Mr. Medina, of the 2004 election specifically, and the changes to the city charter which separated LP&L. It's still your opinion that we have that authority?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, assuming, because I'm going to rely on our city attorney for our legal advice, and LP&L has, in the search of their own attorney, to provide them their own legal advice, but he's the guy I turn to. So assuming we have legal authority to do that, the second question I've got is, do we have legal authority to do more than just cut their budget, but tell them where to cut it? And I asked that question in the context of the LEDA discussion, where we said we're cutting your budget. The initial discussions were, we're cutting your budget by half a cent. Now, we don't care where you cut it from, but we're just going to give you less money to operate with. And my question is, do we as a body have the legal authority in context of the 2004 election to be specific in terms of where the cuts ought to be?
Budget is one thing, operation is something else. In my opinion, is you have the right to cut the overall city budget, which would include one of our departments, which is LP&L. Once you cut, for example, in this example, it's not only a budget item, but it's a bond item. And both of those, the council has retained, as even in the 2003-04 election. Very specific. It says this council retains that. In other words, what do you retain? Well, you retain what you already had. You keep it. And you keep the budget. When you look at the overall budget, they can say, I will not adopt a budget, a city budget, that includes this. Or a bond. I can't go with that bond for whatever reason. You have a right to do that. That's different than saying, and now we're going to go to LP&L and tell you how to run this or do this, or can't do that. The day-to-day operation of what goes on at LP&L is strictly up to the LP&L director and its board.
Okay.
And that's different.
Let me, now, setting aside those two issues, because, you know, it's our legal counsel's opinion that we have the authority to do this. I've got some specific questions as to smart meters and the LP&L budget. So if I could get either Dr. Zeng or Dr. Zeng and folks from their finance department. And again, I really wish that presentation made by those folks on the smart meters had been televised so we could direct people to that presentation. It was a good presentation. One quick question on the smart meters. It's included in your budget for this year, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so if the council decides to take it out, then how does that affect the electric rate? What impact will that have on your rate model?
Okay. I probably have Chad have a detail. He has done this detail study.
Since that is going to be issued with debt, there will be no impact in 13-14. I had the J. Stowe consultants look at what impact would it have in 14-15. And the reason it would impact 14-15 is because we will issue the debt this year and then the first payment comes on next year. I had James Capps run me the debt figures based on a 5% interest rate. It comes to about $1.2 million of what the actual smart meters would cost us in 14-15. The J. Stowe consultants said that the proposed estimated system average increase of 7.3% would be lowered to 6.7%.
But in actual money, what sort of an impact are we talking about?
Comes out to about 45 cents per every 1,000 kilowatt hours.
Well, and that's the point I want to make to the public. We can cut out the smart meter cost, but for this upcoming fiscal year of 13-14, it has no impact on the budget. And so therefore no impact on the rate for this upcoming fiscal year. It's not going to have an impact.
Yes, sir.
And the only time it's going to have an impact is the following fiscal year, 14-15, and it is going to reduce the rate some, but the equivalent of 45 cents per, 1,000 kilowatt?
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, and I will tell you that was on this cutting of the smart meters was on my list of things that LP&L could consider doing in order to impact the electric rate. But the reality is it would impact the electric rate, but not this next year, but the following year.
That's right.
And it's only going to be 45 cents per 1,000 kilowatt. I just want the public to understand, I mean, it sounds great politically.
Sure.
We cut 15 million smart meter costs, but from a practical perspective, it's really not that great.
Right.
Let me ask you a couple of other questions on that. Actually, at this point, I'll yield the floor.
I've got one question while you're there. The 45 cents additionally in 2014, that's estimated by the same rate consultants that estimated an increase of $7 to $10 per month?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Joy?
Chad, beyond 2014, 15, what happens in those years to the rate?
If the project is never issued or the bond is never issued?
No. If the bond is issued, you've said this year coming up, no effect. The next year, 45 cents for every 1,000 kilowatt hours. What about beyond that year? Do you have anything on that?
Oh, man, we didn't look that far out.
Okay. All right. And I have a question. Chad, it's probably more for Dale Stevens or Gary Zing. If the $15 million it remains in your budget, what is the timetable that you would really accomplish getting those smart meters in?
If we started in October with a bid, we're probably talking 18 months to 2 years to get it installed.
So I guess that's my question. Are we really talking about spending $15 million in this coming budget year?
It will be spread out. You're talking about spending, the estimate that we got from several vendors, we averaged it out. We thought 20 million would be a good estimate for budget. We budgeted 15 million for the coming budget year and then 5 million for the budget year after that. But till we put out an RFP, we won't know the exact cost of that.
Well, you're not going to issue any bonds this next year, are you?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
If you stated we're not going to issue bonds this next year, why do we have $15 million in the capital improvement plan?
Well,
I don't understand.
Cut it out.
Sorry?
I'm assuming you just cut it out with your amendment. But if we're going to keep smart meters in, we will issue debt.
Mr. Price?
Cheryl, I want to ask you a question. I remember several weeks ago we were talking about the budget, and we were talking about see if we could make adjustments in the budget. And when we were talking about some of the adjustments that we were recommending, you said some of those adjustments were sort of making the finance department nervous. On the budget that you just presented to us tonight, how are you nervous with this budget, or you feel okay with it?
No, I'm pretty good. The stormwater fund will have its net assets by policy, so I'm feeling pretty good about the budget.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Stevens, Cheryl, if you don't mind, thank you. Dale, if I may be informal. Excuse me? I will. I was just getting some prodding to go over some of the key points. That's actually my intention. Mr. Stevens, what I'm about to tell you, for anybody that's been listening, you've been at some of my town halls at my request. So I've been saying well over a year now, I don't support smart meters for this fiscal year. And personally, would prefer to see the consideration of can you push it beyond 2018 so that you don't add to the decision-making envelope any more than you already have, which is some credibility issues for a litany of reasons. But right now, this council, the board, I think we've got some serious issues with the public we've got to iron out. And to make big decisions, we need the confidence of the public to be able to do so. So what I'm about to say isn't a surprise to you, the management, or I think the board, because I've been speaking about it time and again from this dais and elsewhere. So I personally would rather see, and I'm only able to do one budget at a time, probably something beyond generation. And that's really because of the issue of us making sure the public follows us on generation, not add to confusion, distractions, etc. But the mayor had asked a question, and I think, just to clarify, because I think it's a key point for the public, you will be issuing debt 2013-14, but you will not be financing until 2014-15. So there's no financial impact to the issuance in the forthcoming budget if this is what happens. I hope it's not, but if it does, but the key aspect for the public to understand, so there's no confusion about the budget, is it would appear, but it just wouldn't have a finance issue until the following year. For that reason, I personally, again, oppose it, still have the same position, oppose smart meters, and if we vote for it in this budget year, you are setting it up for future allocation and the cost that goes with it. So I'll just briefly say, I don't know that I have these personal concerns, but I've heard from at least a small group of people, I don't know how large that is, but issues, and we've talked about this before, public safety, public health, i.e., is there an issue in terms of the frequency waves and potential fire hazards as they've been described, privacy issues, security issues. Again, I don't know that I've got those, but I just think I work for the public, and if we get, the public tends to be ahead of this council and every council I've served with, and they tend to be ahead of the board typically, and the board, for what it's worth, tends to be ahead of the council. I think that we need to be careful that we don't inadvertently get ahead of the decision making by the public. And so for me, it's a timing issue, and I've said time and again, I kudos to Mr. Carpenter and the other board members, as well as the management, that did have a discussion by a vendor just this week. But I think that's just now beginning to occur. I think you've got to have that year-long discussion, and I think we can get the public there or not. But I think it's just, I would say this to my colleagues, imprudent to get ahead of this issue. There are other issues to handle. Generation is a much bigger issue, and I don't think we need to confuse the discussion on something that important as well as the other issues that we'll be looking at in terms of the budget. Affordability issues, can we do some additional programs, stabilization issues, adding yet one more issue at this point in time with the upheaval that we've recently seen and some of the comments that have frequently been made from that lectern would be, I think, ill-advised. Mr. Stevens, since I asked you to come up here, is there anything you'd like to add to the position or in terms of financing, so forth?
Well, Mr. Klein, we've talked several times. I'm pretty aware of your position, and I respect that. And although it's not my position and several people's, but you know, eventually I think it will happen, and we appreciate you stating your position.
Thank you. I would just say, and this is just quick consumption for the public, I think we've got to always have these dialogues for this board and the council to work effectively and amongst ourselves. I think for me, I won't be supporting the budget because it's based on a tax rate I can't support. I'm really saying it writ large beyond just simply LP&L. So tonight I will be voting against the proposed budget, but it shouldn't be a surprise, and I know it's not for you. On the second reading, I certainly will hope to see the smart meters removed. Thank you.
Mr. Hernandez?
I defer.
Ms. Joy?
Mr. Stevens, I wanted to remind people of something you said, that in order to install smart meters, we're talking about at least 18 months.
Yes, ma'am.
So for every year that we go, we're pushing it out another 18 months.
Essentially, you probably are. I think if you decided you wanted to do a smart meter program and you wanted to speed it up, I think you could probably get one done in a year if you wanted to go out and get some contractors in to install the meters. But I think that's probably a poor idea, strictly for the fact that you get contractors in that may not see the meter right properly in a socket or something like that, and then that's when you risk having problems with fire hazards and a few things like that.
And when I had asked you earlier, were you assuming we're going to cut the $15 million from the budget? Okay, I was asking if in fact we don't cut it from the budget, then those bonds would be issued in this coming fiscal year.
I'm
Yes or no?
assuming
That's
they will be.
what
I think Cheryl can probably tell you. I know that I don't do finance, and there's a different way when they issue debt and the dates they issue them, and I think she could probably tell you. I think it's a little later in the year than.
What do you think, Cheryl?
Yes, if they're in the budget, we'd issue them somewhere around February, March, April time period.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hernandez?
I noticed a couple of LP&L board members in the audience. Carol McDonald was here, but I think he's gone. And then George Carpenter's here. Mr. Carpenter, could I get you to come up to the lectern? I've got a couple of questions. And of course, everybody knows George Carpenter is a former council member on the City of Lubbock Council, so welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, Mr. Carpenter. The LP&L board has obviously voted to approve the LP&L budget, including the smart meters, correct?
That's correct.
And then at the LP&L board meeting that occurred earlier this week, the item was reconsidered, was it not?
It was.
And what was the outcome of that deliberation?
It was still to be left in.
Okay. It's been relayed to me, Mr. Carpenter, that there's been a change of heart by some of the LP&L board members, specifically yourself. Has there been a change of heart in including this item on your all's budget?
It hasn't changed my opinion of it because it's a very good savings for the public. And that's the ones that we're trying to save the money for, is the people that can least afford the big bills.
And are you aware of any board well, let's take a step back. When the board as a whole reconsidered this item earlier this week as to whether or not to include it in your all's budget, what was the vote?
We didn't take a vote. It was more or less a consensus.
Was there any board member opposed?
One of them spoke that he was not in favor of it at this time, but he was still in favor of it.
Okay, and it was limited to that one board member?
Mark McDougall.
Okay. And I appreciate the name. That's not what I was asking, but I appreciate the name. It's been relayed to me that the chairman of the board, Gail Kring, has had a change of heart. Is that?
It's not a change of heart. They're just okay.
He had not had a change of heart as late as this afternoon.
Okay. Well, let me rephrase the question. Let me rephrase it the way it's being presented to me. Are you okay with the council taking this out of your all's budget?
Well, it's going to cost the public if you do, but I mean, you all have the authority to do it, and you all have been to nearly all of our meetings and have heard the reasons for having it, and so that's a decision that you all have to make. We've already made our decision.
Mr. Carpenter, I appreciate your previous service on this council and your service now on the LP&L board. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Mr. Carpenter, you stated that it's going to cost the public. Can you tell me how much it'll cost the public?
Sir?
You said it will cost the public if we don't install smart meters. How much will it cost the public?
The people that have their meters turned off, approximately 3,000 customers a month, will have to pay an additional average of $60 per bill. And that'll amount to about $2 million in a year for the people that can least afford to pay it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Mr. Carpenter, you don't have to, you can continue to head to your seat, but I just want to take a moment. God bless you. You are here day in and day out, and I just want to thank you for your service. I think you're a consummate public servant. You and I may see this issue somewhat differently. There are merits to your argument, and I think there are often different positions, but it doesn't negate different arguments having certain merits back and forth. But I just want to thank you for the civility and the effort that you always put into the job. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, but it's not an argument. It's just the fact that that's what takes place, and we were just trying to do the very best that we could.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Carpenter, you know that I'm one of your allies. No, you can go to your seat. I'm going to make a statement, but I'm one of your allies, and I'm also the allies of anybody that works free for the public. And the board at LP&L don't get a dime to do what they do. And if you got paid for the things that you do, we couldn't afford those members of the board that ran LP&L. LP&L was just about bankrupt. And the citizens of Lubbock seen fit to put business people in charge of LP&L, and that's what they did. And LP&L came out of bankruptcy, just about being bankrupt, up to where they are today. So I want to thank you for your service, and thank you so much. But I'm going to make a statement about the smart meters. They're going to come. One day they're going to be here, because technology, you cannot hold technology back. They will be here. And so the thing that, and I may not be around to vote yea or nay on the smart meters, but they're coming. And I truly know that, and being in law enforcement as long as I have, there's technology out there that we don't know about. Now, I'm not talking about smart meters either. And so we can't curb technology. We've got one of the hideous things that we have, and we stick it in our ear every day. And so we better understand that we can fight smart meters all we want, but they're coming. Analog is going to be the byproduct. It's going to take the back seat of high technology. Now, the line item, the $15 million for the smart meters, and I've talked to several of the board members, and they did put it in the budget. But what I want to know is, and I may want to ask this to Dale, are you still back there? You can have a seat, sir. I appreciate your service. Dale, I'd like to ask you, on if we go that line item and take the 15 million out for the smart meters, how big of a setback would that give you? Would it be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Because we're talking about 2019, and we're going to be in a pickle at 2019 because we better get busy on that. How far would that put you back?
Mr. Bryce, I'm not sure I can really answer that exactly. I think it's imperative that by the time we do generation and we get it installed that we need smart meters in, and that's just my opinion. I mean, but I think if you push it off a year and start it the year after, I think you would be all right to get it installed by then, but I don't think there's any crunch to get it in except for that. I mean, you got some good benefits from smart meters out there, with automatic disconnects. You can troubleshoot your lines a little bit better. You can limit your outage times and a few things like that, but we've been operating without that for quite a while, at least as long as I've been here, for about 37 years. So another year or two is not going to kill us.
If this year, if we put it off, cut it out of the budget this year, and we're talking about 2019, and you want to get that technology in by the time you get this new generating plan in, will that hinder you, if we cut this out of this budget this year, will that hinder you from bringing them online in 2019?
No, it won't. Okay. The only thing that would be the issue with that is if they decide to build generation sooner than 2019.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Ms. Gibson.
I just would like to make it clear that I'm not necessarily against smart meters at all. And Dale, you and I have talked about this many times.
Yeah, you got one at your house.
Yes, I do. I was at the meeting, same meeting you were yesterday. I saw the same presentation you did, and I understand the minimal amount it's going to add. That is not even the reasoning. The reasoning is even just last night after the meeting, or I guess it was Tuesday.
One of them days.
Whatever day that was. They're all running together these days. But the chairman stated that he would still, and the board would still like to see more research or more presentations, because new technology is coming out. And Mr. Carpenter, I'm sure you understood that new technology is coming out all the time. Y'all still have a lot of research to do because you want to get the right system. If we're going to do this, you want to get the right system and the best system for the dollar. And so I just don't understand why it has to go in this year's budget. I want to make sure we're doing it right. I want to make sure we're not just going to go ahead and issue these bonds. I just want to make that clear, that I believe there just needs to be more research. There needs to be more research on these smart meters. It's not necessarily that I am against them. I would like, again, to see that we look at smart meters to complement the water side, all different kinds, to benefit the whole city on both sides. So,
Mr. Kroll.
Make a couple comments. One about the smart meters. I tend to agree with Mayor Pro Tem Gibson. I'm not necessarily an opponent of smart meters, and I would be happy to have one at my house right now. But I'm not going to support them in this year's budget for many of the same reasons that have been delineated here. I'd like to see a little more research done. We also have an outstanding, I'm also aware that if you're a fan of smart meters, you can find all kinds of research that supports that. If you're an opponent of smart meters, you can find all kinds of research to support that. I also recognize we have a tremendous asset here in the Lubbock area with the Institute of Environmental and Human Health that Tech has. I would love to see them do research because they live here, and they'll have to live with that as well. I also think that we don't go forward with the electric meters until we can also feel good about those and do the water meters as well, so that right now, even if we do the smart meters for electricity, we still have to have meter readers go down. We don't really reduce our workforce that much to do that, so I don't see that much of a cost savings coming. So that's what I want to say about the water meters or the smart meters, and you can be seated as far as I'm concerned right now. I do want to address a couple other things. I will tell you this, Ms. Barnes, you talked about tax and spend. It would be to my personal advantage to cut taxes as much as I could because I'm 63 and a half. Within a year and a half, I can get my tax rates frozen. So selfishly, I need to hold the line on tax increases as much as I can to help me personally. But I'm not up here for myself. I'm up here trying to do what's best for the entire city of Lubbock. And when I look at where we have done some cuts already, and Cheryl, between now and just because I vote for this tonight doesn't guarantee I vote for it in 12 days when we come back on the 10th. But I want us to look at how much we have actually decreased the budget. I look through here and decreasing transfers because of reducing, and I don't expect you to answer that tonight. But I want to go through sometime within the next 12 days. I see several places here where we're decreasing transfers here because we're reducing our revenue. I want to get a better idea of how much we're actually doing some cuts on here. One of the things that have been heard repeatedly, one of the things that I beat the drum about a few years ago is these fees, and that it is a tax, and I want to do it. I want to finance this community the least painful way possible, and I don't think fees are the least painful way possible. They are a tax, and they're not deductible for most folks. If we reduce the fees and offset that, do revenue neutral, and do it on the property taxes, then at least you can get some relief on your income tax. So I want to look for the least painful way to finance our city going forward. Now, saying that, Mr. Loomis, you may be the one, or Cheryl may be the one. We've been really encouraged not to increase our property taxes. What happens to our budget that we're looking at tonight if we hold the line at .49224?
49211?
Or 49211, yes.
Well, we actually looked at it, and it's about $1.5 million. It may be a little bit less than $1.5 million, and it'll have to come out of the O&M side. See, what the problem is, it's most of the increase in the tax rate is in the debt rate. It is not in the O&M rate. The increase in the O&M rate that was originally presented to you before we took part of the ED rate was actually only about .002 or it's .00165 is what it was. The increase in the debt rate is 1.65 or somewhere around that. I don't have it right in front of me. I can look. So essentially what you'll have to do is you'll have to cut the general fund budget or something in the general fund budget to do so.
About $1.5 million you'd have to cut out.
And it's O&M. It's not, because we can't decrease the debt rate because that's the rate needed to pay debt.
Okay, what would we cut?
That's entirely up to the council.
We'll have to discuss that. The budget as presented tonight is staff's best guess based on the information you've given us in the past month and a half.
So we've had some really good discussions, which I appreciated very much.
I can't touch something right now.
And that really was more of a rhetorical question. Okay.
We're not good at getting that rhetorical thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Hernandez.
Just a couple of other questions on LP&L. Quite frankly, I walked in here today because all of us, most of us, heard the presentation at the EUB meeting this past Tuesday, and I came in here with that wealth of information, and I was ready to support the inclusion of smart meters in this year's budget. But I will tell you that based on the answers of your staff, that there would be no negative impact, I should say, in holding off for a year. That's what I heard. And I think the best questions asked tonight in that vein were by Councilman Price, and the answers were, well, it's not going to impact it. Not if we hold off a year. And so the last thing that folks should ever give me is an out. And you gave us an out. And I will tell you that, and this is my analysis so you'll know and so the public will know, we have, as a council, really considered, and I know our staff has really considered holding off on capital improvement projects and push them out, not just a year in some cases, but more than a year, in order to meet some of the fiscal goals that we've established. And even though the fiscal impact on your next year's budget is zero, what I'm hearing is that we can push that out a year and have it zero for 14-15 if we push it out a year, and then have the debt service kick in 15-16, and it won't have a practical impact on what you're all trying to do in terms of new generation and everything else. So unless you've got some new information, Dr. Zing, I'm afraid I'm going to support Councilwoman Gibson's amendment.
If you ask me my opinion, I can add a little more. The reason we're looking for AMR, we has been looking for the last 10 years. So we never take it lightly to propose that to you. It's not like we find a new toy and then just want to have it. That's absolutely not a fact. We look at it because we want to looking for a cost saving overall. You know, I know it's a huge argument, what's the payback period time? But we also know, definitely true, when we had a storm, we had a significant impact because of delay, the restore the power. And we definitely know if we have AMR or similar technology going to help us a lot. You know, we can see the improve. That's exactly we're looking for, improved service. The second part, I think our board member, Mr. Carpenter, mentioned that very clearly, is how do we reduce the fee? That's our board discussing that in last meeting. We do that based on our cost. If you look at our cost right now, our charge, each one is lower than our cost. So there's not much room we can do there. Only way we have to change that game is bring in the technology. You know, just like we say, we charge customer $87 after our reconnect fee. If you have a new system, that fee would be lower, become $10 or less. That's a huge impact to the people who have a difficulty pay the power, pay the electricity. So particularly for the customer really has a difficulty, this is the most impact to them. I mean, it's your decision, certainly, we respect that. And I think we want to look at it again, definitely. Certainly, in my opinion, I hope you approve that because you're going to help all the citizens.
Well, and there is a second reading scheduled in a couple of weeks or thereabouts. So I will tell you, and I think there's no, it's no secret, but that I am an advocate for LP&L, and I don't think that's a bad thing personally. It is part of this city. It was established when the city was created, and it has many useful benefits to the citizens of this city. But I will support Mayor Pro Tem Gibson's amendment tonight. That does not necessarily mean I will support it on second reading, but for tonight I will support it. I would make a suggestion. Your board will be meeting again very shortly. I would ask that the item be placed on your agenda once more so that the council and the board can discuss this matter together and do that before the second reading of this budget.
Thank you.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Zing, I'm just going to follow up on some of my colleagues' remarks.
Yes.
Again, a conversation is what we're in the business of. So I say this in reference to the item before us. It's food for thought to the management and really to the board, who's a policy-making aspect. Having a task force to look at these sorts of issues, I think, is invaluable. I think each passing day, if not minute, further confirms the value of that. So perhaps that's something that the board, I know Mr. Carpenter has been receptive to the notion whenever I spoke with him the other day about it. I won't speak for him, but I think you've got a very responsive board, so I know that's something they're looking at. If you dovetail that in with the issues of timing, I'm agnostic about everything but religion. I'm for what works and is in the public interest. And I'm the first to concede there's usually not a panacea or a perfect answer on any of these issues. So Mr. Carpenter makes some key advocacy points, and he shared them with me personally to say, if you support affordability, you really need to think about supporting smart meters, and here's why. And it's for the reasons he articulated earlier. That may be a winning argument, but whether it's a family discussion or something writ large, it's really about a cost-benefit analysis and having that kind of public discussion so that people can make an informed decision is not terribly complicated. It's quite frankly very easy. We're in the business of common sense, common decency, and common respect. I think if we have that discussion, it may be that in 12 months you placate some of the concerned citizens, some of the critics, but you also have a larger discussion for the public and all involved to have that consumption. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Joy?
I have a question about the motion that's before us. I'm looking at the copy that we received. Is the LP&L reduction and the increasing expenditures in the general fund all in one motion?
Well, it's two separate amendments.
It was one motion with two amendments.
Okay, and we'll vote on those amendments separately?
Well, there's only one motion on the table right now.
Well, that's the, all right, and that's the problem I have is I don't think that we can, at this point, without knowing what the tax rate is, we can be increasing expenditures in the general fund. Cheryl Brock just told us that if the tax rate is not set at what the proposed rate is, then we're $1.5 million. We're looking for other savings. So I think that part of the motion is premature, and it would appear to me it would be better if those were handled as two separate items. Otherwise, I'll have to vote against it.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Hernandez?
And I would ask for direction from council. I think I could make a motion to split the question.
You could move to
amend.
Exactly, to amend by
Splitting it all.
one and then the other.
So moved.
I have a motion to amend the motion that is on the floor to split it into two separate motions in a second. Is there any discussion on the proposed amendment to the motion?
I just would like some clarification on that from Cheryl. And I think this is for me as well as Councilwoman Joy. If we vote on both of these, and let's say they both pass, this keeps it flush anyway. Both of them keep it at the same anyway.
Essentially, the general fund changes are utilizing net assets to fund them, so no, it wouldn't.
It's not going to change.
No, but if the rate changed, it would still cause us to have to lower the tax rate. And one of the items on Councilwoman Gibson's list, actually, we are still having to do remediation at the Fire Academy, and that we failed to get that in the budget, and I take responsibility for that. And so I'd ask her on her motion if she would carry that as well, because we really we have to do it, so it's essentially something we have to do. But it depends. I mean, if the rate comes down, then we will have to do cuts in the budget.
You would have to do that anyway, whether they
Yes, ma'am.
pass or
We
fail.
would.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask Cheryl a question?
Yes, you may. Yes, sir. Yes.
Cheryl, the way the motion was stated and the way that it's now, there's a motion second. As long as they keep it, when you're talking about the 15 million along with the way she stated her motion, you're okay in that part, right?
Yes,
It
sir.
wouldn't mess anything up. Okay.
And Sam, I've got a question, because it appears to me that we've got a motion, we've got a couple of budget amendments, and our agenda item is the first reading of our budget. how can we have two separate motions to approve a budget when the agenda item is not to item by item? I think we're headed down a road right now that if we handle these separately, if the first one is approved, we've done the first ordinance. We've done the first reading.
Well, but you have a present motion that if it carries, you're saying to the public, we're going to vote twice.
Second, so we're all right there. Okay, any further discussion on the motion to amend the original motion? Mr. Klein?
Well, I think just for everybody's benefit, that is the key aspect. If worst case scenario, there has to be some tweaking, then we can do it on the second reading. I will be supporting the motion for that reason and on the merits as well. But the key aspect for anybody that's concerned, I think those are valid questions, but the rate itself is a separate item and can be adjusted on the second reading.
Any other discussion on the motion to amend? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Okay, we're now back to, we've got the first motion is going to be the discussion of the reduce the funding and appropriation of the fiscal 2013-14 budget as follows. Reduce the 2014 LP&L revenue bonds by $15 million and reduce the appropriation for Lubbock Power and Light capital program by $15 million. Now, Sam, I'm going to need another clarification. If both of these pass, are we going to have to do a third motion? Because neither one of these is actually approving the first reading. Well, these are singular budget amendments. So my understanding is going to be that if both of these pass, we're still going to need a third motion to approve the first reading of the budget as amended by the two previous motions.
Well, unless I'm wrong, I think the Mayor Pro Tem said, I move to amend the budget with the following.
Okay. I just want everybody on the council to know what we're voting on.
Yes, sir. And I think you just voted to say we're going to look at the whole budget by splitting these two votes.
And the only reason I brought that up is because of, I just, like I say, I want everybody to know what they're voting on. I'm going to make a couple of comments and then we'll give everybody else an opportunity and hopefully we're going to go to voting. Number one, I want to thank Mayor Pro Tem Gibson for bringing these budget amendments up early. I think it's ludicrous that we wait till the last minute and spring surprises on each other when this is our biggest job as a council. So I appreciate the fact that we're having this detailed discussion about the budget tonight. I'm going to vote against both motions because I can't vote for the budget without a cut in LP&L's budget equivalent to removing $500,000 from their advertising budget. I also cannot vote for a budget that's got a raise in property tax rates at a time with what we've done to our citizens with the increased rates. Any other discussion before we vote on the first one? Mr. Klein.
I'll just be very brief because we had this discussion last year. It's an appropriate and long-standing tradition of this council and councils before us to have two readings, and on the second reading, quite frankly, because it allows further tidying up and narrowing down to have those amendments presented. Now, I don't mind. I certainly otherwise would have done what Ms. Gibson's talking about on second reading, but I'm happy to support this on first reading, but it needs to be understood. There's a process in place, and doing this on second reading, which I'll certainly be bringing forward, is absolutely long-standing and appropriate.
Ms. Gibson.
I just want to clarify one reason that I went ahead and approved this budget with the 50441 tax rate. We are financing street maintenance. I believe, Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the last of the 2009 bond election tax.
It is the last. We've issued the last debt. We issued the last debt in
so this is the last of that debt, and so this is the last of that appropriation of that. So I feel like we just keep trying to cut when we're already financing nearly $10 million a year in street maintenance. And so you just keep, it's perpetual motion, and it's just not going to stop if we don't take care of what we're issuing. And that's one reason I went ahead and proposed this with that in it. I think one reason when we didn't assess the full amount at the very beginning of that bond, the council at the time, and Victor and Floyd were both on the council, and Todd was too, at the time, we felt it was not appropriate for the council to issue that full, it was almost 5 cents, I believe.
Yes, it was.
And use, I don't remember how much it was, but we fought the mayor on it. But we didn't want to issue that full amount and use the taxpayers' money for the next 4.5 years and not issue the debt. But we would have that money coming in every year. And I still support this because it is the last of that bond. So with all that we're having to finance just to keep up our maintenance, that is my reasoning for that.
Any other discussion on the motion to reduce the LP&L revenue bonds by $15 million? Mr. Price.
This is sort of hitting on what Ms. Gibson has said. Cheryl, on this last debt that we have for, this is the bond package that was passed by the citizens back
In 2009.
2009, and this is this tax increase will be the one that the citizens voted on.
Yes, sir.
To put in the budget for this to be the last. And how much would that be? What, 1 point what?
The increase is 1.23 cents.
That right. And so that's, the public need to know that. That's not anything that the council is raising taxes on. That's something that the citizens have voted on for this to
Yes,
be
sir.
in this last budget.
And the council did agree to raise the rate as the debt was issued.
Anybody else? All right, the motion and the second on the floor is to reduce the funding and appropriation in the fiscal year 2013-14 budget by reducing LP&L revenue bonds by $15 million and reducing the appropriation for the Lubbock Power and Light Capital Program by $15 million. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye. Motion carries 5-2. The next motion that is on the floor is to